Greetings and welcome to another Starship Review. This is part 3 in my ongoing series reviewing all of the legendary ships from the 10th Anniversary Bundle. There wasn't one unifying voice crying out for this to be the next ship, like with the Defiant or Crossfield, but rather a few votes here and there for various ships. And since we have 6 cruisers to get through, I thought we may as well take a look at the Phase 2 Connie. Of all the ships in the bundle, this must be the one that sold the players on buying it the most. At least after 10 long years, players are able to get an account unlock in-game capable Constitution from the C-Store. Expectations were high for this ship, and if there was one to not screw up, it would be this one. I'm happy to say they've done a fine job. It's very similar to the Sovereign, which we'll talk about in its own video, but both ships are top-tier beamboats. She only has one Tier 6 counterpart in the game, the Temporal Light Cruiser from the Promo Choice Pack. Despite the fact that they threw in the ionized gas sensor from the Tier 2 refit, the total inheritance package is rather thin. But I don't think most players will mind, as that's not really why people want it. The legendary Connie also comes with an exclusive Phase 2 skin, which was designed for a continuation of the original show before plans changed to have a movie instead. It's quite nice looking in my opinion. Let's talk about the ship, and then we can look at the consoles and traits. The legendary Connie is a full Miracle Worker ship, which means it gets an extra universal console and the innovation mechanic. She sports both a Commander Miracle Worker seat and a Lieutenant Commander Miracle Worker seat. I feel that this was a mistake, and they should have made the Lieutenant Commander specialization a temporal seat. I say this not for any performance reason, but because I feel it would have been a nice nod to the promo version. It fits thematically with the fact that this is a ship out of time, and having 2 different specialization seats would have given it a more premium feel. However, that's a minor complaint. The rest of the seating is good, but not amazing. It has a Lieutenant Commander Universal, but it's hard to imagine that you won't be using it as a tactical in light of the fact that the only other tactical seating is a fixed Lieutenant. The layout works great if you want an aux to bat setup, but becomes awkward if you want to use Photonic Officer, as you'll have to choose between tactical for science for that lonely Lieutenant Commander power. The console layout is strong, with 4 for tactical, 4 for engineering, 3 for science, and 1 universal. As a light cruiser, it's nice and peppy with a solid turn rate, impulse, and inertia ratings. What makes it so good, however, is the Miracle Worker specialization, and I feel I need to interrupt the review for a mini video about the differences between Cat 1 and Cat 2 damage boosts, not only because it's key to understanding why the Miracle Worker powers are so strong, but also because the trait that this ship comes with just had its effect changed this morning in the patch to be Cat 2 damage instead of Cat 1. I make these reviews to inform and entertain, so rather than asking you to take my word for it, let's explore the issue. I want to be clear up front that I'm not covering the whole story here. Going over everything involved with damage, or even just the damage formula, is enough for an entire video, which is something else to add to the to-do pile. I'm simply talking about the part that concerns Category 1 damage buffs against Category 2 damage buffs, also known as Cat 1 and Cat 2, or sometimes players will refer to them as Cat A and Cat B. And why players usually prefer Cat 2, aka Cat B boosts, even though they might be smaller than Cat 1 boosts. You have to think about damage as passing through an assembly line, and at each stage it gets amplified by a different category of damage. There are many facets to this, including drop-off due to distance, damage resistance, and other factors, but as I said, we're only going to be concerned with just the Cat 1 and Cat 2 bonuses. Every weapon or ability that does damage has a base damage value. It's increased by Category 1 buffs and Category 2 buffs and a bunch of other categories. But Category 1 buffs come from tactical consoles, the mark level of your weapons, set bonuses, and lots of other sources. It's the most common source of damage boost in the game. Category 2 buffs come from reputation traits, R&D batteries, buff abilities, and other sources. It's usually indicated by the word bonus. Let's take a look at an example, expressing percentages as their decimal equivalents. Let's say you have a weapon with a base damage of 100. You also have a combined total of 700% in Category 1 bonuses, and it could come from a lot of places, from the mark level of your weapon and all that kind of stuff like I said. And a combined total of 100% in Category 2 bonuses. We multiply our base damage by our Cat 1 buff to get 800 damage, and then multiply that by our Cat 2 buff to get 1600 damage. You may have noticed something here. Our damage went up a lot after that Cat 2 buff was applied. This isn't anything magical to do with Cat 2 buffs, as rational multiplication is commutative, and we could have done the multiplication in either order and gotten the same result, and the Cat 1 buff would have looked like it was doing much more than the Cat 2 buff. The magic doesn't come from that. The magic comes from the fact that we're double dipping, simply by multiplying twice. Because each subsequent category is not only buffing the base damage, but all of the extra buffs that had been added onto it by the previous categories. So it's like a snowball. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the bigger it gets, the more snow it can pick up. So how should we distribute our buffs in an ideal world? Well, let's look at a graph. Let's pretend we have the same weapon with 100 base damage, and we're told we can have a total of 100% in total buffs to split between Cat 1 and Cat 2. Because both damage categories are mechanically identical, the graph is symmetrical, with a maximum output of 225 damage when the buff is split equally between the two, 50% Cat 1, 50% Cat 2. So the lesson here is that you want to try and get your Cat 1 and Cat 2 boosts to be as close to even as possible. You want to have the same amount in each. However, that just doesn't work out in practice, as the game is saturated, as we like to say, with Cat 1 boosts. You'll almost always have more Cat 1 boosts than Cat 2 because Cat 2 is just harder to come by, and it's usually in smaller quantities. And the Cat 1 boosts are usually passive things, whereas the Cat 2 boosts are usually temporary. You are always on the left side of the curve. So given a choice between two buffs of equal size, a Cat 2 boost is going to be better, even if it isn't as large. Any boost will make the whole parabola larger, but a Cat 1 boost will move you further to the left of it, while a Cat 2 boost will move you further to the right. Okay, I hope that all that was clear. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments and I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and we can resume the actual ship review now. Okay, remind me to never go full counter YOLO again. With that information in our pocket, let's look at the two most popular Miracle Worker abilities. As you can see, both narrow sensor bands and mixed armament synergies give relatively massive Cat 2 boosts, and because they're both BOF abilities, they can be kept up most of the time and aren't consumable like R&D batteries. Add to this the fact that it's a full specialization ship, so the Connie gets an extra console slot that can be used to add crit chance or severity, which, by the way, crit damage is Cat 2, and that makes for an incredibly potent combination that the Temporal Light Cruiser, and most cruisers for that matter, just can't keep up with. Miracle Worker was a big power creep for energy weapon builds, and this ship can exploit that to its fullest. Okay, now that we've talked about that, let's look at the consoles and traits. The legendary Connie comes with two consoles, the Ominous Device and the Ionized Gas Sensor. The Ionized Gas Sensor, which is from the Tier 2 refit, gives a bit of perception as a passive, which is more than most low-tier consoles give, so I can overlook the fact that it's not particularly useful. The clicky essentially turns your next torpedo into a high-yield version with movement debuff, but you don't get the normal high-yield effects that torpedo would normally have if you were actually using a high-yield mode. The cooldown's only 1 minute, so if it did give a true high-yield torpedo, it probably wouldn't be competitive, but it would at least be more interesting. There isn't any real visual to go with it, so it ends up just being kind of boring and suboptimal. But then again, it was a free inclusion from a low-tier ship, so I didn't expect much, and I don't hold it against it. The Ominous Device comes from the Temporal Light Cruiser, and it has more going on. Right out of the gate, it gives you a 20% Cat 1 boost to all your sources of damage. While this doesn't seem very powerful compared to other options you might use, it can be used to buff things that aren't easy to buff, like fire damage or electrical, for example. It's a nice thing to have in your toolkit for making niche builds or fun builds. The clicky's a bit weird. Basically does a point-blank AoE fear effect, or at least that's what they're going for, and thankfully it doesn't seem to work very well, or at least it didn't when I tried it a couple of times. You won't normally want to make enemies run away from you. At least I don't, but if you do, maybe you could try it out. The visual effect isn't anything to write home about, but at least it does have one. Okay, let's talk about the traits. The hand-me-down is the Built to Last trait. It gives you a passive hull regeneration and weapon power cost reduction buff. It's not flashy, and better traits exist that do the same or have similar effects, but it's not a bad trait, and both of the things it offers are things you might want. The new trait, the Best Diplomat. If you saw my first look video, then you'll remember me saying this was a Cat 1 boost, and at the time it was, but in the patch this morning they changed it to be Cat 2, and to increase the total amount required of power to get the maximum benefit. Basically, you get somewhere between 10 and 30% Cat 2 damage based on your total engine shield and aux power. As we've learned in this video, that's a pretty respectable amount of Cat 2 damage if you can keep your power levels up. I've done some testing with this trait, and my conclusions thus far are that it's not as strong as multiple haste traits we have now. It's also difficult to keep those power levels up, but it does open up a lot of new possibilities. For example, there are Borg duty officers in the new Borg lockbox and have a chance to max out your power levels for 5 seconds when using bridge officer abilities. There's also things like the red matter capacitor, which you can get from the Phoenix store, and the old leech console. I think that ultimately this will prove to be too weak to be competitive, or at least more hassle than it's worth. And since it's strictly a damage boost and doesn't have anything visually or thematic to offer, like the temporal anchor trait from the crossfield, which makes your gravity wells look really cool, that means it's going to be relegated to a if you don't have anything better then use this status. It's a very good trait, but it's just not top tier material. So, conclusion time. The Phase 2 Connie is a zippy cruiser that can fully utilize Miracle Worker powers, can use 5 tactical consoles, has a very strong trait, and an interesting console for off-meta builds. And, oh yeah, it's the goddamn Connie. No bloody A, B, C, or D. Any beam build would do very well on this ship. It's iconic, and it's fun to fly. If you treat her like a lady, she'll always bring you home. I give the legendary Connie a 10 out of 10. If you're worried that every ship is going to be a 10, I can assure you that will not be the case. But for now, we're still on smooth sailing. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know which ship of the remaining 7 you'd like to see, keeping in mind that the Sovereign is going to be last. If you liked the video, please leave a like, and if you want to be notified when more of my videos come out, then don't forget to subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.